evening, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the College of Complexes tonight for an evening of solutions with Andy Anderson. My name is Tim. I'll be videotaping this college for posterity on the internet. You can find our videos at the College of Complexes homepage at www.collegeofcomplexes.org, and there you will find almost 20 months of archived college material up there. You can also access the same videos through www.timsvideo.com and see a bunch of things up here for posterity. For those of you new to the college, it follows the following format. We have a brief announcement period, followed by our speaker. Then we have a question and answer period where we encourage questions, and then our infamous rebuttal period where you can speak up to a certain allotted amount of time, depending on how many people want to speak at that point. It's usually up to about 4 minutes. And we have 2 rules here, and I think most of you guys know them. First rule is what? One fool at a time. And the second rule is no personal attacks. So, in the spirit of... Okay.
LT is the director of the Northwest Information Service out of Palatine. And okay, are you ready? He seems to be armed with a vast of books.
You ready, sir?
Without any further ado, we have
Coke, easy ice, and I'm working. Yeah, I do have a question.
Gary.
I don't see this anyplace else. Does the star mean anything?
It's just a popular item.
That's nice. I have no idea what I wanted except my Coke. Thank you.
I think you're ready. Yes, and he's got his torch there. Watch out.
Hello, good evening. My name is L.P. Anderson from the Northwest Information Service, and tonight we're going to be talking about specifically, this is called an evening of solutions. So if some of you, you should all have, if you want to follow along with the program, there's a beige article up here that has the references listed. We're going to give a brief summary, a minute or so, of 14 books that form the core of our talk tonight. Come up along this side if you want to get something from the table, if you don't already have the literature, or if anybody of you are interested in following with the references that I cite. Okay?
Oh, right.
Yes, sir. What can I get for you?
Philly steak
With the fries?
with the fries and
So-
no green peppers, please.
Okay.
My brother and I run something called the Northwest Information Service, and basically what we do for a hobby is translate books. We realize that people don't have time to read 20 books a week, and we specialize in subjects that are blacked out by the mainstream media. And one of the books we'll be talking about shortly has a chapter on the media and a chapter on the ivory tower, and they are specifically talking about the subject of intellectual prostitution. In America, we have highly paid intellectual prostitutes in both the universities and in the media that are paid to produce reports that are false. They're paid to lie to us. Fox News is now used by journalism schools all over the country. Journalism schools use Fox News as the demonstration of how good propaganda is done. They pay people to lie to us, and they make it sound like news. All the surveys lately show that people that get their news information from Fox are the most misinformed and uninformed people on the planet. That's where we are today. Tonight's talk is, for those of you, Professor Judy Wood, in her book, she quotes It's on this white sheet of paper. You could make notes if you had a copy. It says, if you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you. Now, let me give you a slight demonstration here. See me throw a baseball. I have the reasonable expectation that that ball will go up. It's hard to do with a microphone. When I drop this ball, every child knows that. If you drop a baseball, there's an expectation that it's going to go down toward the earth. It's not going to shoot out sideways from your hand at 200 miles an hour. Right? We have principles, physics, gravity, inertia. Anybody that has a driver's license and keys and can drive a car knows about general principles of physics and gravity. The media in America, though, they tell us things, they give us explanations for things that defy the laws of physics and gravity. Some of you may have seen this demonstration in the past. This is a grill off of a stove. It's made out of cast iron. And the torch I've got, the blue flame gets to be gets to be about 1800 degrees. Okay? Everybody see that I'm holding that torch on the end of this grill, cast iron steel grill from a stove. And the end of this steel is not melting. And I'm holding on to this thing with my bare hand, and it's not even getting warm where my hand is. Does everybody understand that? Does everybody understand what we've been taught since we were little, that if you don't want it to melt in a fire, you make it out of steel? Pot-bellied stoves, knives and forks, big forks for turning over the coals and logs. Steel doesn't melt in ordinary hydrocarbon flame. This happens to be a torch that's something called MAP gas. It's a special blend. It's a little hotter than normal propane. Propane, butane, alcohol, jet fuel, kerosene, coal, you name it. A normal hydrocarbon fire will not even weaken steel, much less melt it. Think back, as we're talking about the various pieces of information tonight, remember these two demonstrations. One about gravity and one about the common knowledge that all of us live with all our lives, that we stick a fork in the fire to turn the coals under the barbecue. That steel fork isn't going to melt. Okay? There's 2 books tonight out of the 14 books that I brought. I mentioned before, my brother and I, we translate books. We'll take a book like this and maybe 3 or 4 like it, a wheelbarrow full of paper, and translate the essence of that into a 1-page cliff notes that somebody can read in 5 minutes. Because there's no time, the average person doesn't have time to read 15 or 20 books a week. My talk tonight is called An Evening of Solutions. Well, we teach 7th graders. In order to solve any problem, you have to first correctly identify the problem and then correctly identify the solution. This book here on my right hand, it's called Where Do the Towers Go? It's written by a physics professor, Judy Wood, a retired professor from Clemson. It's a physics textbook that gives you all the physics with the graphs and charts and everything else of what happened, what the physical evidence shows of what happened in New York. And the physical evidence is not debatable. It's agreed upon by all sides of the debate. The media in America continue to lie to us. They continue to give us a fairy tale story that is contrary to the physical evidence. This book outlines the problem we're faced with. the media in America are just maintaining Americans in a bubble of ignorance. If you step outside that bubble temporarily and start looking at solutions, this book here from Rocky Mountain Institute, it's called Reinventing Fire. It's a story of, it's also like a college textbook, very well researched. The history of Rocky Mountain Institute in Colorado is that since 1984, they've been running a Think and Do clinic, teaching energy efficiency, the least cost strategy. They've been teaching Americans how to build houses without furnaces that heat for $10 a month. This book is full of solutions. If you open your mind and look at it with an open mind, you see that there's all kinds of good things happening all over the world, driven by the concept of businesses doing the most profitable thing, the least cost energy strategy. Many technologies that are non-polluting and are beneficial to the environment are actually more profitable than the destructive technologies of coal, oil, gas, and nuclear power that is subsidized in America. This book, Reinventing Fire, is worth every bit of the $40 that you would pay to send away for it from Rocky Mountain Institute. And that's listed, this is listed as the 14th book on this list. Where Did the Towers Go is number 1. Those two will give you a fair idea of the range between ignorant mythology and documented reality that's being used all over the country, all over the world. For example, in Germany has already put up enough solar panels on schools and houses and along the side of the Autobahn everywhere to shut down 20 nuclear power plants. At today's prices, solar energy is vastly cheaper than nuclear power, and wind power is cheaper by a factor of 50% or 100% cheaper than solar. So there's no excuse for talking about building any kind of a new big power station, whether it's coal, oil, gas, or nukes. That's been spelled out by Rocky Mountain Institute for the last 25 years, okay? We'll move on here. Many of you, if you've attended any of my other talks in the past, know that I work with books put out by Project Censored out of Sonoma State University. This one is from 2011. They publish a book every year. It's called, this is Censored 2011. It gives you the top 25 blacked out stories that the media intentionally black out. It's not like they're missing these stories. It's like reporters in America can get fired for writing about them. They're taboo. There's a whole list of things you can't talk about on American television, and you can't read about it in the newspapers, or it'll cost you your job. You just get fired and blackballed. A woman named Christina Borgeson wrote a book in 2004 called Into the Buzzsaw. She's a regular contributor to Censored News, but she collected the stories of 18 Pulitzer Prize winners who got fired and blackballed one day because they tried to report something in America that is considered just taboo by the big corporations. So if you only can read or get one book a year, I would highly suggest getting any one of the last 3 or 4 years of Censored News, but the new one comes out with 25 news stories and a whole list of also junk food news. It comes out in November every year. There's a new book Two of the best investigative reporters in our country are named Donald L. Bartlett and James B. Steele. They've been writing about where did the American dream go and things like that for the last 25 years or so. Their hardcover book is called The Betrayal of the American Dream. And they talk about what's happened in America over the last 25 years, and the first step towards solving these problems is to wake up and face the reality that's being reported all over the world. Other people in other countries are showing us the way. Iceland, for example, arrested their bankers and threw them in jail. They didn't bail their banks out. The people in Iceland just said, you're criminals. You know, we have to, language matters. When you talk about, criminals masquerading as our elected officials, they're not Republican or Democratic representatives. They don't represent us. They're criminals that are taking bribes from the big companies to shovel money to rich people and rich corporations, all the time masquerading as our senators and congressmen. Our Senate and Congress is the greatest, I've said this before, it's the smoothest running intellectual whorehouse on the planet. Intellectual prostitution at the highest levels. And that's what the first step towards solving these problems means we have to face the reality and get some good ideas from other countries.
How about the killer smog in London?
There's a brand new book, and a brand new book by
That took a
Chris
century to
Hedges.
build up.
It's called Days of Destruction and Days of Revolt. It's the fifth book on the list.
I paid money. Give me a break, please.
It's the fifth book on the list, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. Chris Hedges and Joe Sacco are the two authors. They traveled around the country. They produced this book after visiting places like the area where mountaintops are being blasted off and the cold sludge and everything is being dumped into rivers, destroying the stream. They visited places where hydraulic fracturing is being used to produce natural gas while they're totally destroying the water table underneath the states where they're fracking. There's a rumor that the big companies, the gas companies, have made a deal with the people in Pennsylvania so that they can do fracking all through Pennsylvania and totally destroy the wells and the water table so that they can create a new gold mine, a pipeline, make new pipelines with fresh water coming from the Great Lakes. So, in addition to the disaster in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of years ago, the disaster of fracking, hydraulic fracturing, and destroying fresh water is a crime of biblical proportions. And the solution is to do what other countries are doing, speak out at all levels. As Chris Hedges and his friend wrote, they wrote an article, I've got pages up here. If you don't have time to read this whole book, there was a 4-page summary, basically, of the essence of this book. It showed up on a website called Common Dreams, May 20th, like a couple of weeks ago. The title of this article is called Rise Up or Die. He said, and there's a poem in here talking about a man who realized, if things look bleak, well, don't just sit back and let the corporation run over you and you die anyway. At least stand up and try to protest and do something constructive. And we've had great progress has been made in the past and all in this country and in other countries when people reached critical mass one day and they stood up and said, I can't go along with that program anymore. The term is, no, I won't go along with it. Many people call that civil disobedience. It's not violent resistance, but Gandhi and Martin Luther King showed what could be done when masses of people finally reach critical mass and say they will not go along with the program anymore. And this is what that book talks about. Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And there's all kinds of examples in there of things where people are protesting and making a difference down at the community level. I highly recommend it. But at least, if you can't read the book, take home a copy of this article from Common Dreams of May 20th. Common Dreams, incidentally, is listed down on the bottom of this ivory page. It's one of the premier websites one of the premier websites for posting news that's happening without the junk. And people ask me sometimes, aren't you interested in this or that? I have to admit to being ignorant about some things. If my life depended on it, I couldn't tell you when the last date was that Lindsay Lohan got out of rehab. Or I can't tell you the name of Tiger Woods' girlfriend. These are junk food news stories. They fill the airwaves with junk, 8 minutes of commercials every night, and there's no time left to tell us about things that really, really matter, things that are reported all over the world, right? So this list, those first 3 sites I call portal websites, Common Dreams, Smirking Chimp, Truth Out. They have massive archives. Truth Out especially has huge environmental archives of what's happening all over the world, pictures of the ice melting, the hole getting bigger at the north during the summer, all kinds of things. The climate scientists are more and more in agreement about what's happening. And a lot of times, after reading the next book or a summary of it, it becomes easier to understand, how our politicians can do what they do. This is a book written by Professor Martha Stout. It's called The Sociopath Next Door. Her thesis is that 1 in 25 of people is a sociopath with essentially having no conscience. They will try to game the system. They'll steal from you if they can. If they're billionaires, they will destroy as much of the environment as possible to make more profits for their company. We have not used the proper language in this country to deal with our sociopathic, psychopathic billionaire owners of certain corporations that own the coal companies, the oil companies, and a lot of the big defense contractors that are using depleted uranium dust dispersal weapons to make Iraq and Afghanistan uninhabitable for humans. Incidentally, a lot of radiation experts have since 2005, there's an article on Common Dreams in October of 2005 calling depleted uranium, and their whole analysis is that so much uranium, armor-piercing bullets, bunker-buster bombs, have radioactive dust dispersal weapons have been exploded in Iraq and Afghanistan, that those 2 countries are uninhabitable long-term for humans. Our soldiers coming back from Iraq are being divided into, they're being analyzed according to whether they had children before they went over and what kind of children they're having, or if their babies are being born with all kinds of defects and deformities. There's a huge worldwide growing analysis, a scandal about what's happening in Iraq, because women over there, basically, the majority of them can no longer have healthy children because they're living in a radioactive wasteland that's much like downwind of Chernobyl after it exploded. So, solving this kind of problem means standing up to everybody that's waving the American flag saying our sons and daughters are doing their patriotic duty and they're keeping us safe. They're fighting Al-Qaeda in foreign countries. Well, that's not what's happening. They're clearing the land of people that are living where the corporations want to dig or build a pipeline or dig for resources or whatever it is. After you digest the sociopath next door and you understand that there are some people will lie to us on key issues if they're paid enough money. And we come to the next book on the schedule that talks about one of the biggest lies that's been put out in America over the last 30 years. And it's been documented all over the world. This book is a book by Nancy Turner Banks, MD. This was printed in 2010. It's called AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire. And it's a history lesson of the last 150 years of American corporations who have been supporting the drug trade, the opium trade, rather than trying to stamp it out. They've been supporting it to prop up stock prices, and banks have been involved in money laundering. There's huge money to be made, in the global drug trade. And by the way, this is number 6 on the list. It's called, I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's number 7. It says AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire. This thing is a history lesson about a lot of things, not just the so-called AIDS epidemic, but it is the best summary in a book form written by a doctor. This is the best summary of the myth of the AIDS epidemic that began with an announcement in 1984 by an intellectual scientific prostitute named Robert Gallo, who became a multimillionaire by standing at a podium like this one and announcing HIV is the cause of what's making these people sick. It was a lie then, it's a lie now, and hundreds of thousands of scientists and doctors all over the world have been working with the real knowledge on what causes the AIDS illnesses for at least the last 20 years. What you need to know on that one is 4 things. They announced HIV at a press conference. Robert Gallo had not produced any scientific documents at all showing that HIV was the cause of what made people sick. He just announced it because he was a failing cancer researcher. These guys were looking for a virus that caused cancer. It was Nixon's war on cancer. Some of you may remember that. And it turned into a total failure. They were beginning to lose their funding, so they said, let's blame this new syndrome called, they called it GRID at the time, gay-related immune deficiency. It was showing up in gay men. Well, it was called GRID at the time, and they decided to rename it AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Our own CDC wanted to put out an announcement saying the cause of the immune system destruction in these young gay men, the cause is overuse, massive overuse of recreational drugs and antibiotics. A lot of doctors knew that, and they were overruled. They were told to be quiet if you didn't want to lose your university funding. When the announcement was made in 1984, all research into other causes of AIDS, nothing was funded except they poured massive amounts of money into studying HIV. If you were going to have a research grant studying how HIV makes people sick, you could become a multimillionaire. But if you were wanted to look for any other causes that maybe weren't infectious, maybe it was toxic drug use or something else, your funding was cut off, you were ostracized by the medical health community, and you quickly lost your funding. So for some of you in this audience, I understand some of these facts that we're citing that are pretty much accepted in the community, they're going to be a big shock to young people coming through high school in the last 20 years, being told that you're growing up under this big cloud of death called AIDS. It's a big shock when you find out there's no AIDS epidemic. The whole title of her book is AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire, the Deadly Virus of International Greed. There was an epidemic of malpractice. There was an epidemic of greed. There was an epidemic of fraud. This has all been documented and confirmed all over the world many, many times over. But it's a big shock. It's what I call, it's a shock like the Catholic Church syndrome we've talked about before. If you go into a Catholic church where they don't know that the priest is abusing their kids, and you make that announcement on Sunday, half of the congregation will say, you're slandering the man. I'm not going to look at the evidence. That can't be true. I'm just not going to look at the evidence because the blinders just come down, like rose-colored glasses just close over the eyes. Not going to look at it. The other half of the people say, if a shred of this is true, if even 1/10 of it is true, we have a responsibility to look at it. So there's an article up here in relation to that. There's a gray flyer up here asking the question, do children have rights? It's a 2-page summary of the questions that a lot of these doctors have said over the years. Do children have the right to be protected from medical malpractice? Because the AIDS community wants to give away free bogus HIV tests. It's in this book and dozens of others. The HIV tests that we all hear about do not test for the virus. They come with an insert in the package put there by the lawyers that says, beware, this test doesn't test for or react to the HIV virus. They're covering their butts against lawsuits the way the asbestos industry try to cover themselves before they shut down in 1982. So the 4 things you need to know about AIDS is the virus is harmless, it's not sexually transmitted, it's not bloodborne, it's not fatal, and the antiviral drugs, the other half, the reason people died, so many people died, starting with about 30,000 a year, was they were taking a fatal medicine that had been renamed an antiviral drug. It was a fatal chemotherapy drug that was selected and renamed, intentionally renamed and put in capsules as an antiviral drug. There's a flyer up here that talks about a book written in, the title of that book, it's not on the list, it's called AIDS by Prescription, the story of AZT, and it's actually Poison by Prescription, written by John Lawrenson. That book was published in 1990, and that book describes how people were dying. We were told, in this country, we were told that a lot of people were dying of AIDS. Well, they were dying all right, but they were being poisoned by the cheerleading doctors that were feeding them the fatal medicines. You can download a new video. There's a website called the Alberta Reappraising AIDS Society. For anybody that's interested, there's a video that talks about the life of Ryan White, the hemophiliac boy. Some of you may remember that, a hemophiliac boy. Well, the last thing that they say in this video is that you need to know that Ryan White didn't have AIDS and he didn't die of AIDS. He was murdered. Ryan White was murdered by a doctor that poisoned him and cheerleaded that boy right into the grave, giving him what they knew was a fatal toxic chemotherapy drug that had been sitting around with no patent since the 1960s. Another thing, Jim Mars, for those of you that are interested in that subject, the database is enormous. The synopsis I just gave you on HIV/AIDS, the solid documented data on that is as big as the database on asbestos or cigarette smoking. This is not the opinion of 1 or 2 doctors that wrote a book. It's a massive database that's being used by doctors curing people of the various illnesses all over the world, and they're helping people. They're finding out that the people that were told they had AIDS in Africa, incidentally, have all the bacterial infections and things, tuberculosis, malaria. Those things are being diagnosed as AIDS to make it look like there's an AIDS epidemic in Africa. So it's 5 years. The World Health Organization, if you didn't know, put out a report 5 years ago in June. This is the 5th anniversary of the World Health Organization saying there is no heterosexual AIDS epidemic. It's over. And so it's time to move forward and start curing people. This is a recent book talking about our occulted history. Jim Mars is an investigative reporter. He wrote a book called Rule by Secrecy. He wrote a good book on the Kennedy assassination. He's an investigative reporter that's written a lot of good stuff about the secret billionaires that run our economy. The book is called Our Occulted History. And he asks the question, do the global elite conceal ancient aliens? Well, the answer is, it's overwhelmingly yes, because in this country, we are trained to laugh at people that talk about pictures or testimony taken by our astronauts, NASA, the military. They have hundreds of thousands of hours of film, files of up-close personal landings, people walking around. There's a project called Project Disclosure that is putting out a new DVD called Sirius, like the dog star, S-I-R-I-U-S. And they talk about close encounters of the 5th kind. That's where something lands and the people are walking around interacting with humans. It's one step beyond the close encounters of the 4th kind. So this book talks about all kinds of things in human history. The Vatican and the Smithsonian both have archives of things that they've been keeping away from the general public. Like if you do an archaeological dig, it's called Jim Mars, Our Occulted History. People have been digging up stone artifacts, tools, bronze tools. They've been finding these things in rock and digs that are 250,000 years old, 10 times older than what our normal history is supposed to be. There's evidence that the human race has been on the planet in our form for vastly longer than what the official world governments have been telling us. And you can log on to his site, read the book. There's all kinds of things in here. Incidentally, on page 77 of this book, he talks about an eyewitness testimony case of some people that watched some Tibetan monks. They were chanting and pounding on drums and using horns, creating certain sound frequencies. If you get the sound frequency just right, you could levitate big stone rocks up the side of a mountain and build a building with it. So there's
Bullshit.
not bullshit. It's in there, and you can log on to the website in Canada, written by. There's a thing called the Hutchinson effect. The man is giving demonstrations of new energy beams that neutralize gravity. Our military has been working with it for 30 years, but they've kept it from us. Some of you think it's not possible to keep secrets. Well, there's a book, I didn't bring it, there's a book called Atomic City, I think it is. They talk about Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Some of you are old enough to remember Oak Ridge was a whole city where women went to work there, doing all the work to produce plutonium and work on the atomic bomb. That was kept secret from the public because they were patriotic. Nobody talked about it. In the Air Force today, the military, the Army has a thing called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And you have to sign that code, and you're patriotic. You're going to pledge to defend America and its all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, the Air Force, if you join the Air Force, you have to sign something like the Military Code of Justice, where it says it's a $10,000 fine. Going in, it's going to be a $10,000 fine and 10 years in prison if you talk to anybody about the experiences you have seeing and interacting with UFOs while you're in the Air Force. That's how they keep it quiet. It's a $10,000 fine and 10 years in prison if you speak out. And there are several airlines have a policy. If you report an interaction with a UFO, you just hand in your pilot's license and you're done as an airline captain. Now the captain in Japan, the airliner, the guy that was flying Japan Airlines off the coast of Alaska, they didn't have that restriction. So he was able to report that he and his passengers watched an aircraft carrier-sized UFO follow their aircraft for 20 minutes off the coast of Alaska. This kind of stuff is being reported all over the world. And what you can't do today is tell people they're seeing swamp gas. People carry cell phones with portable cameras. People whip out their camera and they film stuff up close and personal. A little over half of all UFO sightings are big metallic objects that come out of the water near ships, sailing ships going across the ocean, coming out or going in. But a vast majority of America has been trained to laugh and ridicule anybody that sees or reports something like that. People laugh until they have an experience on their own. Then they know it's real. And this is where we are today. They're in several of the European countries, they're opening public reading rooms and letting people see the military films and files of the last 40 years of the human interaction with all the other aircraft that aren't ours and aren't Russian. So, Project Disclosure, you want to make a note of that. On the website called Want to Know Info, their motto is for a brighter future. If you're working toward a brighter future and you want solutions to healthcare issues or housing issues or pollution issues, all kinds of things, there's about 12 different categories. One of them is called Project Disclosure. And it's a bunch of ex-military people, some astronauts, a bunch of people that work for NASA. They produced a book in the year 2001, just before 9/11. They want to alert the human race to the fact that our government has been reverse engineering and sitting on new forms of energy that don't use coal, oil, gas, or nuclear. That's why they're keeping the knowledge of other alien races away from us. They don't care that we know there's other people. Catholic Church said it's okay to realize that God created other people. They put that out 3 years ago, came right down from the Pope. It's okay for Catholics to realize that God didn't just create us, created a bunch of other species, other races.
God created aliens?
Well, one said, one's laughing or they're saying God created aliens. Well, they're not aliens after we know who they are and they become our friends. It's like, the Russians aren't aliens to us anymore. They're Russian.
Pardon me?
Or the Australians.
Okay.
So, a year ago, I picked up a book out at a health fair out in Schaumburg. There's a 3-day health symposium with a bunch of doctors, all kinds of alternative healers and everything else going on out there in Schaumburg at a convention center. There's a writer named Liam Sheff. He's produced this book called Official Stories. There's a bunch of chapters in here, like he gives you the official story, like Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have shot Kennedy. And then he gives you the report, the actual reality of what really happened. And there's a good chapter on 9/11, a summary of the official story versus the reality of what really happened that day. But one of the best chapters in here, of course, is his 30-page summary. In 30 pages, you can get a summary of dozens of other books in understandable, readable language of the whole entire history of both the hoax of 9/11 and the hoax of the AIDS epidemic. Those two hoaxes are summarized in one book that's under $20. This book is called Official Stories. It's Official Stories by Liam Sheff, Liamscheff, and he also has a website by that name also. You can do a Google and find his website. And it's the ninth book down on this list, on this ivory copy. For those of you who are watching, it's the 9th book listed here. Number 10, of course, on the list. Number 10 is the 2013. This is another edition of Censored News. And this is the 3rd or 4th year that they've been reporting. There's a whole chapter in here called Truth Emergency in America. As Americans, we've reached the point where Americans believe certain mythology long past the point where other countries have, corrected what's being taught. Other countries are moving forward with modern knowledge on a variety of things, where in America we still have the mainstream media and the main newspapers controlling what we see and hear. Again, this book describes, they teach journalism students how not to get fired and blackballed if you're going to go into a career in journalism. So if you want to know the top 25 stories, like the disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, how it's being underreported. The disaster in Japan, that's being totally underreported in the United States. If the reality of the reactor mess in Japan was fully covered by our press, the way they cover the NBA finals, say, everybody would know that we should be shutting down nuclear power plants as fast as possible, and we shouldn't even be thinking about pouring money into trying to build any new experimental plants. Long before we get a kilowatt of energy out of any new nuclear power plant, the environment is going to be destroyed by continuing to burn coal, oil, and continue to pollute it with nuclear power, nuclear radiation. So the authors, incidentally, this is Mickey Huff and Andy Lee Roth, and I just, there's no way to describe what this book is like if you've never read one of these. It's just it's like walking through a door into the other world where all the blacked out news is. And they describe, they're becoming more and more adept at describing how big money and big advertising dollars are being used to shape and mold public opinion. Incidentally, I missed, when we talk about official stories, the three big myths that I'm collecting data on, along with a bunch of minor ones. The three big ones are, of course, the myth of 9/11, the myth of the AIDS epidemic, and the myth that our soldiers are defending and fighting for American freedom in all the other foreign countries. What our soldiers are doing and have been doing for the last 40 years is accurately described in Smedley Butler's book, War is a Racket, from 1935. It was reprinted in 2003 by the Butler family. Brigadier General Smedley Butler, with this little book, he blew the whistle on the military-industrial complex, how they were the effort behind these various wars periodically, because they make enormous profits, like a shoe company. A shoe company can make 10 or 20 times the profit, 30 times the profit per pair of shoes by selling them to the military. And most of us here are old enough to remember the joke about the $600 toilet seats, the $425 screwdriver sold to the Pentagon. That's what he's talking about. War is a racket, because they wave the American flag and say, well, nothing is too good for our fighting boys. Well, our fighting boys are being cast off once they get back here into America. 22 a day, 7,000 a year commit suicide because a lot of them are homeless, and the VA has no help basically for homeless veterans. They're just, our society is not dealing with the problem. That's because we don't know what's happening in foreign countries. If we knew, we would stand up and say, our 5% of the world's people spend $1 trillion a year on the military. America, 5% of the world's people, spends twice as much money collectively as all the rest of the planet combined on military and industrial complex things. We're the largest exporter of arms of all kinds. The Defense Department, the defense contractors are making huge profits. They're rolling in money. And we don't need the oil over there. We could bring the troops home. As Butler wanted to draw a 200-mile limit around the United States. He said, out in the oceans, let the ships patrol out to 200 miles out. America doesn't have any natural enemies. We're not worried about the hordes of Canada coming down here and stealing our women and children. The idea that we have to have $1 trillion a year military budget is a giant corrosive myth. Professor Green wrote 3 years ago, he said, all you have to do is understand one number, $1 trillion a year. If we don't come to grips with that one, that $1 trillion a year being poured down the military rat hole is eliminating the middle class in America. There's no money left over for schools, roads, everything else. And now, it's not just $1 trillion a year going to the military. Our Congress, that is the criminals masquerading as our elected officials, they are running the greatest welfare for the rich program that has been seen since the pharaohs walked the earth. They're shoveling money to billionaires in amounts that the human race has never seen. It's way, way worse than it was with the bankers in the run-up in 1929. And for those of you that think I might be Democratic or liberal, let me say this. I believe that we're heading into our 4th term of Bush-Cheney corporate criminal policies. And a lot of other analysts are saying the same thing. Everybody thought we'd get a giant change when Barack Obama got elected in 2008, but he didn't clean house. He kept most of the criminal bankers that had run the country into the ground. He kept them, and he selected more people from Goldman Sachs and Chase and the others. We have, one book talks about the Wall Street. We have a government run by Wall Street. Not by big corporations, but by Wall Street bankers in particular, in key places all throughout the Bush, Cheney, and now the Obama administration. For those of you, we talk about, there's two books here. I'll just go and we'll flip the order real quick. Number 11 down there on the list, number 12 is a thing called Predator Nation. This is brand new. It came out from Charles H. Ferguson. Charles H. Ferguson produced a documentary called Inside Job. Have any of you seen it? Who has seen Inside Job about the Wall Street bankers that robbed the country blind? Well, in this book gives a better explanation of scientific prostitutes, intellectual prostitutes, what the Ring of Fire people call biastitutes. People in the biological or science communities, they're brains for hire. They're scientific prostitutes that are paid to produce reports, they're paid to go on television and flat out lie to us on key issues. Now, our country hasn't seen anything like this, and language matters. When somebody is flat out lying to you and telling you something that's knowingly false, the correct response is, that's a bald-faced lie. Not that you have a difference of opinion. I forget the famous woman that, she wrote a book on the Holocaust, on Holocaust deniers, and she's requested to come to debate these people that deny the Holocaust. And she said, I'm not going to be part of that debate because there's no debate. History shows that the Holocaust happened. And to have a debate and deny it is like debating whether the earth is flat or round, or debating whether water is wet or dry. It gives the uninformed person the impression that there's doubt here. This is how they do it. They pay people to have debates when there's really no cause for debate. There's no debate about what happened in the Gulf of Mexico with British Petroleum. It's a monumental, biblical-sized disaster, and thousands of people all along the Gulf are sick and on their way to dying. You know, a bunch of them have died already from the toxic chemicals and everything else that washed up on the shore. Stuff blew inland. It's a disaster down there, but the press doesn't cover it. Oh, it's summertime, tourist season, and we're back in business. And this book, Predator Nation, describes that better than anything I have seen in a long, long time. I would, it's a paperback. It's not expensive. It's like a $16 paperback. Predator Nation by Charles H. Ferguson. Okay. And I constantly, when I give these talks, people say, "Well, I can't believe there's people in America that would be that evil." We have one person that's not here, and I constantly says, "Well, I can't believe 9/11 was done by anybody but Al Qaeda because we don't have any Americans that would do something that evil." It's what's called a false flag operation. False flag comes from the old term of sailing ships. If you wanted to invade a country, let's say we want to invade Cuba. We paint one of our ships to look like a Cuban ship. We fly a Cuban flag, and then we sail it off the coast of Florida and have it fire a bunch of rounds and kill a bunch of people in Florida. And then the news media says, "Oh, we were attacked by Cuba. Now we got to go invade Cuba." That's a false flag operation. And 9/11, along with many others, going back to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution when they got us into the Vietnam War, we've been getting into wars and skirmishes because the American population has been misled for 50 years by these false flag operations. And people ask, well, if the evidence is so overwhelming, how can our politicians vote for these things that are so criminal? Jim Hightower published a book in 2003. He listed the first 2 years of all the legislation passed by the Bush administration. He said, take a look at this. Wade into this toxic waste and ask yourself, what kind of politician or person do you need to pass a bill that says we're going to cut the funding for Meals on Wheels, or we're going to cut the funding that gives meals to programs for disabled children. We're just going to let these people die. Well, the answer is in a book called The Franklin Cover-Up, if you haven't seen or heard of that. To pass the kind of legislation, you want to know why there were so many sex scandals on the Republican side of the aisle. all through the Bush years is because to do what they did, to pass the legislation they passed, you need perverts. You need perverts. Ordinary people with a pulse and a conscience won't go anywhere near that legislation. So the Republican Party has been harboring a bunch of individuals that have been videotaped. They're high-ranking officials from the Reagan era on forward. The Franklin scandal, the Franklin cover-up describes a pedophile ring run out of Nebraska where Larry King, a Republican from a savings and loan scandal out in Nebraska, was running an airline operation privately. They were flying 9, 10, 11-year-old kids out of Boys Town, boys and girls, to have sex with high-ranking public officials in Washington, and they were videotaped. If you're a billionaire and you own a videotape of some congressman having sex with a 9-year-old boy or girl, you own that congressman. You wonder why they run in lockstep on certain key issues where there's big money involved. Well, the Franklin cover-up explains how this scandal went right to the top of the Reagan administration when George H.W. Bush was there. The FBI in Nebraska, the highest levels of the FBI were involved in the cover-up. The lead investigator, the first guy starting investigating these children's stories, was murdered. Several of the children that came out and tried to testify before the grand jury, they were prosecuted and sent to jail for long terms. And a very clear message went out through Nebraska. You even think about speaking about the Franklin scandal, and your life might be in danger. It's common knowledge, if you've ever talked to anybody that studies prison life, people that are involved in child abuse or satanic rituals, anybody that's convicted of anything like that doesn't last long in an American prison. Even our American prisoners have some kind of standards. People hate child abuse. So if you want to have the ultimate control over a congressman or a senator that has, let's say, some idiosyncrasies about wanting to be with 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, all you have to do is tell a congressman or senator, we'll make you a multimillionaire. All we ask in return is that you just let us videotape one of your sessions, and then we'll make you a multimillionaire. As long as you stay in line, you can live high in the hog for the rest of your life. The earlier book was called The Franklin Scandal. This one is called The Franklin Cover-Up. That's where we are. And the solution to this is for people not to shake their heads and say, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. I can't believe that.
Some dessert?
I'll tell you what another person says. It's not my term, but I like it. He says, time out, time out. It's head pulling time, people. It's time to pull your head out of the sand or the clouds or wherever else it's been stuck and hold it up to the light of day and look around reality. Pull your head out and look around. This is what's happening in the real world. And who is it, Edmund Burke, that's famous for saying, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing? That's all that's necessary. Good people to sit back and say, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to get involved. And this is why people in high-paying jobs today in a lot of companies, they don't want to speak out. They don't want to rock the boat because if you're not in a union, you could get fired for expressing a politically incorrect view. Okay? The last thing we'll talk about before entering into a few minutes of solutions is another really interesting book that you can order it through Barnes & Noble and Borders or online. It's written by a man named Eric Larson. Eric Larson is a retired English teacher from one of the law colleges in New York. He wrote this book called The Skull of Yorick, Y-O-R-I-K. The Skull of Yorick comes from Hamlet, where there's an empty skull, where they're talking to this empty skull looking for wisdom. if any of you ever remember that reference. I didn't. I had to learn it from this book. But anyway, the title of the book is The Skull of York. The emptiness of American thinking in a time of grave peril. And there's several chapters. One of the best chapters in here is he's talking about people in the so-called left media. Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Or Howard Zinn when he was alive, or a whole bunch of other left media, supposedly, that tells us what's going on. And the question he asks is, free speech. Free speech does not give us the right to yell fire in a crowded theater, okay? If you yell fire in a crowded theater and there's no fire, you're disrupting the business of that theater or the people's right to, undisturbed privacy. Somebody's yelling fire every 2 or 3 minutes and there's no fire, it disrupts things. Well, his question is, suppose there's a policeman or a fireman sitting in that theater, and suppose they see a fire starting off in the corner that nobody else sees. Suppose somebody is trained to recognize fire, they see the start of a fire that could be a catastrophe. Do they have a right to speak out? Should they alert people to get out before damage occurs? Or can they just quietly get out, walk out, and let everybody else contend with it? Who has the responsibility to blow the whistle when something is happening right in front of our face? This is this whole chapter talking about the so-called media, how they have absolutely been covering up the number one myth of our time, which is the media filmed. They filmed the total explosive, they filmed the destruction of the towers in New York, and they called it a collapse. But the newscasters that were there on that day, they were using the term controlled demolition. The people, the eyewitnesses in New York that actually saw what happened, they saw the buildings being blown to dust, while the sound on the TV was saying the buildings are collapsing. Many, many writers have written that the solution to 100 bad things that are happening in America, the defunding of our schools, the surveillance, the increased surveillance, wiretapping, wanting to collect our emails, phone calls, this is all being driven by the myth of 9/11. Without the myth of 9/11, you would learn that Osama bin Laden was on the CIA payroll right up until he died. He was one of our assets. You would learn, without the myth of 9/11, you would learn that our own CIA is sending money to Al-Qaeda cells in certain parts of the world now as we speak to fight certain factions in Syria and other countries. You would learn that Al-Qaeda was funded and basically created by the CIA and the American intelligence. Al-Qaeda didn't spring up from disgruntled Muslims that hate America. It's a myth, people, a total myth. And if we realize that it's a myth, we can start putting pressure some way or another on our elected officials. We could start making phone calls like some people are doing and get officials to do what 90% of the country, 80 or 90%, wants the troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Americans are sick and tired of seeing their sons and daughters come home with PTSD and everything else because they're not defending freedom over there. We don't need foreign oil. And I held up that first book at the start. This book, Reinventing Fire, Rocky Mountain Institute first published a book, Amory Lovins published a book in 1980 called Energy and War, Breaking the Nuclear Link. In 1980, 33 years ago, they spelled out how saving energy is cheaper than digging for it in foreign countries. Well, since then, there's been a total revolution in all kinds of equipment. For those of you that have never seen a solar panel up close yet, this is a small solar panel. It puts out 10 watts, but it has an aluminum shell. The new ones on the back, they come with a little mini inverter. This one doesn't have it yet, but they come with a little converter, a transistorized inverter much the size of a cell phone, right? That little converter converts the sunlight into 220 volts. It feeds right into the grid. It's just they hook it up right to your meter, or you have a separate meter, and you get credit for how many hours you produce. The price of these things, the price of solar, has come down about 80% in the last 20 years. Commonwealth Edison just put out a report. The Edison Electric Institute just produced a report, a 26-page report, saying that ComEd does not want to be put in the position 7 years from now that Kodak film was in. Kodak made film and everything went to digital cameras and they didn't keep up and they had to file bankruptcy. Well, the internal report from ComEd, echoing what the Rocky Mountain Institute has been talking about for 20 years, says that 17% of the public in America today has access to solar energy that's cheaper than what they're paying their local utility for electricity. 17%, depending on which state you live in. Now, as the price of these solar panels comes down, the percentage of Americans that could switch to solar and make money and have cheaper energy, that price goes up. When solar energy gets cheaper than what a utility sells their gas or electricity for, people go solar. Germany, as I said, has already put up enough solar panels to shut down 20 nuclear power plants. 20 nukes. And Sweden has got a massive number of wind machines and solar panels already up, and they're going after the rest of their fossil fuel. Iceland, Greenland, a whole bunch of countries expect to be off of fossil fuels altogether by 2020. This is happening very fast. Now, it's not far out into the future, but we have to support it. We can't keep going along with that 1 in 25 sociopathic criminals that say, oh, well, we're defending oil. We got to be dependent on oil for the next 30 or 40 years. It's a big myth. And as I said, the censored news books, wherever they are, the censored news book it's 1895. It's a $20 paperback with the tax. This ends up being the best resource you can have if you can only buy one book a year and digest it. It's not a quick read. Each chapter is a summary, a synopsis of some story of something good going on, or where people woke up and they're doing something constructive. It's good stuff going on all over the country and all over the world. So you can log on Rocky Mountain Institute, incidentally. Make a quick note here. Rocky Mountain Institute is down at the bottom of that list of websites. That's where that book comes from. It's a 3,000 square foot house up in the mountains of Colorado with no heating bill and a $5 a month electric bill. Well, it was $5 a few years ago. Now they get a check back from the utility for the excess electricity they produce. They are teaching people, and the solar decathlon in Washington every 2 years is a demonstration of light-powered houses. The colleges build 800 square foot portable, transportable houses that are powered totally by light. No utility bills coming into them at all, and they have excess electricity to run a plug-in electric vehicle for a few kilometers a day. That's the 10th thing they're graded on. So the future of energy is solar and wind power. There's no debate on that. That is happening now. And to debate it shows that you are unaware of what is happening around the world. When Amory was traveling 20 years ago talking about energy efficient products, he constantly had to tell engineers in other countries they were developing or trying to develop a new kind of motor or something. He'd say, well, so-and-so company has been selling that for 3 years over in this country. what already exists should be considered possible. If something has already happened, it's not a debate anymore. And for somebody to say, well, that's far in the future, that's far in the future, when it happened 10 years ago, that shows the level of what a man named Phil Rockstro published an article 5 years ago. He called America a Disneyland of militant ignorance. I can't think of a better term. Is on many subjects, Americans are living in a Disneyland of militant ignorance. And the solution to that ignorance is for their friends and neighbors and anybody else to quietly try to find some compassionate way to help them move forward and look at evidence on things that's very easy to understand. On all the topics we talked about tonight, there's nothing here that can't be understood by anybody that graduated from 8th grade. You don't need a college education for any of this. You need what Professor Griffin said, you need a 30% open mind. Don't even need a whole open mind. 30% open mind and look at the evidence, step through the psychological barrier. But from judging from a couple of looks on faces here, I think that on some subjects, a couple of you are still on this side of the barrier and don't want to look at the evidence. Well, that's understandable. That's how people move up what was called the Galileo learning curve. Galileo was first and he got arrested, but he was right. And then people came along behind him, and then when 90% of the public, when 90% reaches critical mass on something, then it's no longer considered controversial. So be kind to your less informed friends, neighbors, and relatives. They are just like Professor Griffin says, they are today where we were a year or two ago. Knowledge spreads from person to person, talking to each other, going through the population, because it's not in the news, not on television, not on radio, and not in the newspapers. Project Censored describes how the blackouts function. It's a two-pronged process. They promote the myth on all channels 24/7, and they simultaneously run a coordinated blackout on Albert Einstein and 500 of his friends saying the earth isn't flat. That's where we are in America. And we have a unique media blend in America that no other country is faced with. And so there's a wealth of information out there for any of you that are interested. Websites, books, articles. You can take one of my cards back here. Feel free to call us. We have 100 books, those loaners. You can borrow a book from us if you can't get it from the library. Feel free to borrow a book and mail it back to us a month later or whatever, 2 months. But this is the only way people can learn in America if it's on subjects that are intentionally blacked out by the corporate press. Okay, I see it's about time to start questions. Questions and answers?
Real quick, Andy, before
We will list, when anybody has a question, I will list where the solution is in the references to all the specific questions that people ask that we haven't covered, okay?
For purposes of our web audience, Andy, can you give us a little bit of what you do on a voluntary basis out in Palatine with the science fair and the students?
The question was, for those of you that don't know, I'm a volunteer science coach at a middle school for Science Olympiad. I spent the last 18 years helping 7th graders, teaching 7th graders, 8th graders how to build scientific mechanical projects for the school for a program, a competition called Science Olympiad. It's an Olympics of science events. So if any of you are looking to spend some free time or something working with kids, there's probably a middle school near you somewhere that could use a volunteer, because there's 23 events every year, and they're looking for coaches that can read the books and coach one of those events. The daytime teachers can't do it all with the budget cuts. What?
Still a question.
That's what I said.
Yeah, come on, Tim.
Okay,
All right.
let's thank Andy.
Andy, I know you said you don't trust the media very much, and most of your material is based on books and on the internet. Are there any other publications that you personally read or trust, like newspapers or magazines, that sort of thing?
The question is, what other publications, what do I trust? I get most of my information from internet news sites that are run by former news people or journalists that left mainstream journalism because they got tired of the junk and the prostitution and everything else involved in putting out a daily newspaper that doesn't tell people what's really going on, what really matters. The mainstream media is concentrated on junk, while the alternative media, three of my favorite sites are listed there. Common Dreams, Smirking Chimp. Truth Out is run by a former high school teacher and a journalism student called William Rivers Pitt. Common Dreams has articles written by famous journalists. I find a lot of the new books on these two sites, the Smirking Chimp and Common Dreams. A lot of official stories, or Robert Shear, Jim Mars. A lot of these people, they have their own sites, but they will post an article, a breaking article of news on something that's happening, and it'll show up first, as far as I can see, on Common Dreams and in the Smirking Chimp. So those two, and I tell everybody, stop watching Fox News. Why, if you're going to watch any news stations at all, watch the others, even though CNN and ABC aren't a whole, well, they're more mainstream. They're not as oriented towards just bald-faced lies. At least some truth will leak out in some of the other stations, but not Fox News.
All right.
Thank you.
Charles, then Mary Bennett, then Mike Foley.
Yeah, you say in your literature that 9/11 was carried out by high-ranking people within the Bush-Cheney regime. Has a list been published of the names of who these individuals are, and what exactly did they do?
Yeah, that's your question?
To the buildings and the Pentagon that isn't accurate. I mean, we saw planes going in the building.
Okay, the first, to answer your question really quickly, the first thing you need to understand about 9/11 was that the planes crashing into the buildings in New York had nothing to do with the destruction of the World Trade Center. The two planes crashing in they produced a little smoke from the kerosene that burned off quick. The buildings had been prepped days and weeks in advance, and they were blown to dust by well-placed internal explosives and some other form of energy that converted them to dust.
Including the Pentagon?
The Pentagon was something else. The Pentagon now has eyewitnesses speaking out. They're not so afraid of getting killed as they were right after it happened. Eyewitnesses are now coming forward and saying, reporting they were there inside when the internal bombs went off. The Pentagon had several explosions internally before whatever flew into the side made that small hole. The pilots there's a website called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, made up of military pilots that have debunked it.
John, where can I have the list of the high-ranking officials and everyone involved?
Okay, the high-ranking officials that sold us the myth and orchestrated the cover-up, the names are published. Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice, Philip Zelikoff, the people that put out the names on the 9/11 Commission report were the people that were entrusted to put out that report and sell us the myth to keep it going. And the media, all you have to do is look up the names of the owners of ABC, CBS, NBC, look up who is the owner of the board of directors of the BBC, because they had the script that day. The BBC reported they were reading a script about the collapse of Building 7 20 minutes before it happened. The media had the script, and they laid down all the pieces of the myth of Osama bin Laden, the legend of the hijackers. The media laid down all the myth before noon on the day of 9/11. The media was involved in it. And the media silenced all the reporters that actually were on the air at the time they were using terms like, didn't that look like a controlled demolition? I mean, a few things leaked through there and then the airwaves were scrubbed clean. But no, the people that sold us the myth aren't all the high-ranking officials in the Bush-Cheney administration. Their names are common record. They should all be in jail for promoting the myth.
They never published the list.
I just said that. Okay, next question.
I just know, is this list of websites that are all inclusive, or these are the highly recommended?
That list of what, the question was, is this list of websites all inclusive or are they highly recommended? No. I have probably 150 websites bookmarked on my computer. These are all what I call portal websites. Each one of them is a portal or a doorway into the other world where a lot of blacked out news is, and they are linked. All of these are highly credible sites that will give you links to other credible sources. And here's a man shaking his head. I feel your pain. I really do. You are apparently where I was 8 years ago before I started studying this.
Okay, Mike Foley.
Yeah, Andy, you tell us that these government officials and the media and the people, high-level business officials, they're all feeding us all these lies and everything. Why are they doing this? Why don't they just tell us what's going on and laugh at us and say, you jackasses or slaves, hell with you? Why do they bother with this charade?
The question is a good one. Why do they bother with a charade? Well, the charade of 9/11 was necessary to motivate Congress and the American people to support the totally crime against humanity invasion and destruction of Iraq and Afghanistan. The American public would never go for a 10-year occupation of each of those countries when we have cheaper energy sources right here in our own country. They lie to us because there's huge money involved for these companies that have control of our government and Congress. The oil companies are making huge, huge profits. And as I said, if it's one of the 25 sociopaths, 1 in 25, they don't care if they destroy the environment. They don't care if they destroy the Gulf of Mexico, if they can make another 20, 50, $100 billion profit. They just don't care. That's who they are, and it's up to us to come out and call them on and just wake up and face the reality of what these people are doing. And that's what we teach 7th graders. First, face the reality and correctly identify the problem, and then look for the most common sense solution you can find. Does that answer your question a little bit even?
No, a lot. It does answer my question a lot.
Because
Although I do think they could just tell us, you say the American public wouldn't go for a 10-year occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that they just laugh at us. We don't care if we're going to go to Iraq to steal the oil.
Next question. Next question.
Yeah, you're right.
Would you tell us a little about your own process on how you evaluate claims to decide what you feel is credible and what you feel is unsubstantiated or delusional? And also, would you give us 2 or 3 examples of so-called conspiracy theories that you think are ridiculous?
Okay, it's a 2-part question. You want to know how I evaluate which sources are credible and which sources aren't, more or less, and what I think, well, I'll take the last part first. One of the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, of course, is that 19 guys with box cutters overpowered our military and created all the events of 9/11 without the least little bit of resistance from our military and anywhere else. That's one of them. Credible, how you can tell information is credible is by looking at who is producing it, okay? If, on my card it says Northwest Information Service Database Translations. I don't work with the opinions of one guy that wrote a book when there's 10 or 15 or 20 scientists from all beginning to say the same thing. My brother and I collect books. Once we get 10 or 15 books on a subject, that's no longer one science opinion. And if they're working with basic principles of physics, chemistry, gravity, it has more credibility than somebody that says, well, the steel just melted and building fell down. I mean,
Does that answer your question?
okay, what
Not
specific-
entirely. You said something about 19 guys with box cutters taking on the U.S. military.
Defeating the U.S. military is what they said.
I never heard of the U.S. military being attacked with box cutters. Could you tell us what incidents you're talking about?
We're talking about the myth, the conspiracy theory that is known to be a ridiculous myth, that 19 guys with box cutters were able to orchestrate an event that defeated the best efforts of the United States military to stop the damage before
What
it was done.
At what date and place was the U.S. military allegedly attacked by guys with box cutters?
Well, we're saying that the U.S. military was defeated on the morning of 9/11. They were not able to respond. And that one day, the military was
The U.S.
ineffective.
military was not attacked, or to the best of my knowledge, there are no claims that the U.S. military was attacked on 9/11, which is why I'm trying to find out what you're talking about box cutters allegedly defeating the U.S. military, since I've never heard that the U.S. military was ever attacked with box cutters.
No.
Who made that claim?
That was the official story, that they used box cutters to overpower ex-military pilots on the planes, right?
No.
So you haven't read any of the literature. You're not familiar with what's common knowledge out there in the public domain.
Thank you.
You have to read.
3 minutes is
Jeff,
enough.
Jeff?
Wow.
Jeff, you have a question?
right now. Oh, later. Okay.
I guess I'll.
There was never any mention of building 7.
I missed that.
Now, when somebody talks to me about 9/11, and I tell them all the whole, they say, oh, they wouldn't do that. Well, I just tell them this. The question is, well, I just wanted to state
How did I miss that?
that building 7. You just tell the individual, research building 7. Because most of the time they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
The question was, why did I miss the comment on Building 7? All you need to know about the myth of 9/11 was 3 big skyscrapers were supposedly brought down with 2 plane crashes. And up until a year ago, a judge in New York had never even heard of Building 7, and he lives in New York. Building 7 was the 3rd World Trade Center skyscraper that was brought down with controlled demolition at about 5:15 in the afternoon on 9/11 after they evacuated it. And there's all kinds of film from different angles showing that that building was a classic controlled demolition that was prepped days in advance. It wasn't done by the hijackers or the terrorists that supposedly the 19 guys that attacked America on 9/11. All you need to do is know that 3 buildings came down from the effect of 2 plane crashes. A 7th grader could figure that out. So the hard part, the easy part is looking at the evidence. The hard part is stepping through this psychological barrier that keeps your mind from looking at the evidence. I sympathize with any of you that are still on this side of the barrier and haven't looked at it yet. Once you cross over the barrier, you move forward and it becomes very easy to understand what happened. Okay, Jeff, you were going to say something?
Yeah. All right, it's good that you keep on repeating, as it were, this idea about people being one place as opposed to a later place. And as I recall earlier, you made a comment to the effect of be kind to those who aren't yet where you are. All right. I'm still trying to get a better feel for the methodology that you use to really make sure that you're in the right place. My sense of it as a historian is that it's really hard to make sure you're in the right place on historical matters, especially with respect to specific events as to how this or that specific event went, especially insofar as the analysis of the evidence for this or that specific event requires scientific expertise. So insofar as, in other words, insofar as you do not claim to be an expert in physics and all these various disciplines, can you understand how someone, not only about you, but about those on the other side of the issues, let's say about 9/11 or whatever, someone like me is listening to guys like you and listening to the guys on the other side, okay, how many of these guys are physicists, etc.? Yeah, they're going to quote physicists, and the folks who disagree with you are going to quote other physicists, I take it. And I don't have the time, I'm not going to take the time to wade through those slugging matches. Under those circumstances, I can see why you would make an argument to this and that effect. But I don't know what to do with these arguments, given that I'm not going to bust my ass digging in, taking the amount of time it would take.
Well, the question is, again, how can you tell what's credible? How do you know what sources are credible? The method we use is we collect books written by people that don't have a financial incentive to lie to us. Many of the, a retired airline captain, per se, has no incentive to lie to us and promote the myth of 9/11. When university professors, especially in the scientific or biological communities, there's massive amounts of dollars going into university research, and companies, corporations are producing this money. They shower these professors with money with the understanding that the professor will produce a report that's favorable to that corporation, whatever it is, okay? And so other professors, many of them that know the report that guy produced is a total crock. But if I speak out as a professor, if I speak out and blow the whistle on him from this other college, I'm going to lose my funding. Professor Duisberg describes that method in the, there's an article here called the AIDS Blunder, How Could It Happen? And he says it's huge money in motion. And very, very few, in the scientific community and many disciplines, if there's enormous money at stake and people want to keep their jobs, they lag behind speaking out until they retire, until they're financially secure, right? And now a man like John Goffman, who was recognized as he was the father of radiation and human health. He blew the whistle on the nuclear power industry in 1969, published a book called Poison Power. The man was the co-discoverer of plutonium. He had long credentials. Other people came along behind him and started publishing similar things. And after a while, you have a database, not just one person, but you have a database of different reports, all from credible sources. Okay? Is the battery wearing down, or do we know?
Yeah, battery's wearing down. We need to switch mics.
We're being blocked out.
Batteries right here.
Yeah.
There's another mic there. Switch mics.
Switch mics.
There's another mic right there. There's another mic right there. Switch mics.
Yeah. The CIA.
Do you have to check?
That sounds.
You got to adjust the volume on that, Charlie? Charlie, you have to adjust the volume on that with this mic?
They're too close together.
Just wait till he finishes the battery. We'll get right to it.
Should be turned off.
That sound will move it to our phone. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is that you have two microphones.
Oh.
We'll just make a 20-second change. Everybody take a quick break.
Yeah.
They're coming in.
Physics.
Yeah.
Oh, not that. I'm telling him. He's full of bullshit. Mike, that's two. That was two.
Okay, you got sound, Andy.
Is it time for
We're back in business?
Yes, we're back in business.
We're at 20 to 10, another few minutes. Anybody got, we'll finish questions for a few minutes yet.
How much is that solar panel you have cost?
That solar panel back there, you can buy those for probably about $50 now, something like that. That's a sample, more or less, a small one. You know, you get the bigger ones that are 100 watts, 200 watts, and the cost per watt is less. So you can buy a 200 watt solar panel today for about $350 to $400. It's like under $2 a watt. For anybody that's interested in seeing the latest in solar and green technology of all kinds, there's the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. The MREA is up in Wisconsin, up near 8 miles east of Stevens Point. Stevens Point, Wisconsin. It's like the McCormick Place Auto Show without the cars. They got solar panels, windmills, electric cars, healthcare booths. 250 vendors come from all over the world to set up that 1 year, 3-day fair. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday coming up 2 weeks from tonight up in Wisconsin. June is 21st, 22nd, is it? 15th, yeah, 20. But it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 2 weeks from yesterday. So if you're interested in seeing the latest technology, demonstration of solar shingles and all kinds of stuff, LED lights, samples, that's the place to go in the summer. Okay?
Where is that?
It's called the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. Keep one of my cards with my phone number. You can call me for info on any of this stuff. People call us day by day all year long for specific pieces of information on a wide variety of subjects. It's up in Amherst, Wisconsin, east of Stevens Point, 8 miles east of Stevens Point. Okay?
Martin Key.
You got it?
Let's see. So, sir.
I have a question. As a physician, you know, you made the comments about HIV and the virus. And the problem I have is that you can say that there's a bunch of books out there that support your statements. There's also a bunch of books that say exactly the opposite. And you're absolutely right, there's a problem in medicine with financial interests on the parts of researchers. But the fact that a researcher has a financial interest does not make his results invalid. And we're still confronted with the problem that in real time today, how do you tell the difference between researchers that are producing funded research, much of which is funded by the government, which is probably just a suspect, but how do you know who is compromised and who got lucky in the sense that, yes, I got paid to do research, and boy, am I fortunate that I got paid to produce the result that actually is the truth. Because otherwise, I'm going to have to wait another 20 years to find out. And I've seen research that is very promising, where people will say, look what I found. And 5 years later, yeah, it's gone. How do you tell the difference in real time?
The question is, how do you tell a difference in real time? Well, the answer to that is you have to have a list of sources that you consider credible, that have published other things.
But you already explained that your big potential sources are people who've made their money and have now retired. I have to wait 20 years for those people.
No, not all of them. There are people that are still, you know. Well, Rebecca Culshaw wrote a book called Science Sold Out. You know, she's fairly young. I mean, in her early 30s or something, and she wrote a book on the whole, from a mathematical point of view, the whole hoax of the AIDS epidemic. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that is highly, highly credible. And if you haven't looked at a fraction of it yet, in answer to your question, Luc Montagnier from France, the guy that got the Nobel Prize or shared it for co-discovering HIV, he has been saying since 1990 that HIV is not the cause of AIDS. And so a lot of the original people are backing away as the lawsuits come up through the courts. There's a documentary put out by the 60 Minutes of Metatel of England, Joan Shenton's group. They produced a documentary called Positively False. There's another documentary that you can buy easily. It's called House of Numbers. It's a documentary where they went around the world and just interviewed a whole bunch of people. How do you tell somebody they're HIV positive? You look at the work, the body of work these people are producing. It's exactly the same thing as the body of work that came up by people saying that cigarette smoking is harmful to your health, when the reality was shouted down by the tobacco industry, who was producing false claims. I can give you a whole bunch of sources that are credible if you want to take a minute after this talk is over. It's not just one source, it's dozens.
All right, Charles?
Yeah, this book you keep saying, it's no mistake. It says these stories are either underreported or blacked out. So how do we know if the story simply isn't? I mean, there's a lot of stories on The Wire. Have you ever seen The Wire?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stories. Charlie asks, how can you tell if something is underreported rather than blacked out?
The real question I have is, what is the mechanism that word goes out that this story, you've got an awful lot of newspapers, TV and radio stations. What is the mechanism that they disseminate this blackout? How do they do it? How do they...
The question is, how do you run coordinated blackouts?
Yeah.
Well, the owners of the station, they make it known to the editors generally know what stories are taboo, and so they don't even make an effort to try to cover them. How that whole thing functions is described very well in Christina Borgessen's book called Into the Buzzsaw. It's a classic, it's out in paperback form now. She describes, it answers the question exactly, it took a whole book to do it, how the media, they set the agenda. And certain stories are high in the agenda, certain themes are high in the agenda. I jokingly tell people, if you watch the mainstream news at night, the lead story is going to come out of one of 5 general categories: rape, robbery, murder, train wreck, or plane crash. There's some kind of disaster, and you won't see anything about teenagers volunteering, helping old people in a nursing home, or all kinds of stuff like that. Maybe a human interest story here and there, but the lead story on all channels is some kind of bad news all the time. And they're shaping, molding public opinion in America to a point where Americans don't think, there's anything good happening. It's all, why should I vote? They're all bad and everything like that. Yep, way back there?
Yes, Diana.
She's waving her hand.
Let's go to rebuttals.
Rebuttals. Do you want to start with the rebuttals?
Yes. Let's thank our speaker. Let's get to the rebuttal period.
We have, I would say, 5 minutes for rebuttal.
That's fine.
John Eric. Is this the last? Yes.
Okay. It's an open mic. Let's get started. Let's get started.
Joe Mayer?
Joe.
I confess to being a scientific whore, but I also wonder whether I'm speaking to the Disneyland of militant ignorance. I'm not quite sure. One of the things, many of us question some of the things that Andy says, but what he's doing is giving us a survey, a synopsis of what he has done. If you don't like what he's talking about, then get the reference that he's cited and read the book and determine for yourself whether it's a credible source or not. Is it peer-reviewed? Does it have other characteristics that make it? Now, at the Music Box Theater, which is 3700 North Southport, there's a movie currently showing called We Steal Secrets. And it's the story of two people. Julian Assange, the head of, originator of WikiLeaks, and Private Bradley, the Army analyst who funneled a lot, some 250,000 documents to Assange and his WikiLeaks program. The movie is very great. It is a documentary. It's a little over 2 hours long, and it costs $9.25 to see it, but it's good. I would recommend it. With reference to the UFOs that Andy was talking about, when the UFO craze was very popular, the government hired a professor at the a physicist at Northwestern University, whose name is Alan Hynek. Alan acquired the nickname of swamp gas, so he was known as Alan Swamp Gas Hynek, because almost all of the reported UFOs that he came across, that he was assigned to, he attributed to swamp gas. After he retired and shortly before he died, in an interview, he admitted that there were 4 incidents, only 4 out of all of them, where he didn't know. And it was not swamp gas, it was credible people and there's sufficient evidence to raise the question of what was it. Solar panels are wonderful objects. They operate now between 12 and 18% efficient. That's not a lot, that's very poor. But some physicists in England and France have developed a technique, what they call quantum dot covering. In a typical solar panel, the energy that is transformed into electric energy comes from a small section of the spectrum in the visible range. It's not very much, a very, very small section. By putting these quantum dot coverings on it, it takes the entire spectrum and concentrates it into that region of the spectrum which is used by the solar cells. So that's coming up, and they run about 35 to 38% efficient. That's all I got to say.
That was a good idea, Joe, to go back to the source and check it. Andy, a lot of what you said is skepticism that many of us were entertaining for a while. At least I do. I'm a skeptic in general, and don't have much belief or trust in politicians or the corporations. But the accusations or the claims that you made are very, very big, very strong. And there is a saying, I think Hitchens said it, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
David Hume.
David Hume said that? Even better. The issue is validation. And what kind of, where I hesitated is that you described like there are 2 camps and you hope, it took you 8 years to go to the other side. With scientific objective inspection of events, you are not supposed to be on any side. Otherwise you lose your objectivity, then you have an agenda. So the issue with validation is a lot of problems. One of them is the credibility. True. If somebody is known to be a liar, you will be very skeptic of what they do. But look what they do today in court. I mean, there are a lot of false arrests, right? And the profiling. Usually the police, something happens, let's say on the west, on the side, the police goes and gets somebody who is black between the ages, around the ages between 18 and 30, and that has a police record. Okay, maybe they have been in trouble before, but does that prove that they committed that particular crime that they're accused to? And of course not. But this is a mistake that we shouldn't be making just because politicians are corrupt and are very vulnerable to lie and manipulate. Is not a proof. It is a conjecture. Okay, it's only a conjecture, and we have to be very careful with that.
I go to the movie at least once a week, and I read what the critics say about the movie, and sometimes the critic will mention the performance of the actress or actor and say, oh, I'm just throwing something out, Brad Pitt at his best in this movie. Well, let me say that to you. And then, you was at your best tonight on the microphone. I heard you before. And I came here because I wanted to hear Andy specifically. Now, and the reason for that, Andy is part of the 1%. And I don't mean the 1% we read by the paper. I mean the 1% that falls in the category of a Plato or Dad or Virgil or anybody else that did their own thinking and refused to accept the official version. There's a man apparently will not accept the official version. And why should anybody be upset because of that? He's talking. Nobody died. And if you go back to the peoples I mentioned, like Dante or Virgil or Plato or Nietzsche or whatever, they was in the 1%. How many Nietzsche you know? How many Platos you read about? These people come in the few. And when have they ever picked up a gun and said, oh, let's overturn this? I don't remember none of them doing that. What they did was pointed out the goddamn lies, the inconsistency, the illogic, and the falsity. That's what they talked about. And they talked about what was wrong at their time. If you read Dante, he mentioned the corruption at the hierarchy of the Catholic organization or church or whatever you want to call it. And he named the Pope that he was a contemporary of. Now, I'm old as anybody that wrote them books. I was a grown man when President Eisenhower warned us about the industrial military complex. He mentioned that tonight, somebody gonna sit around and make comments about that. I was a grown goddamn man. I don't have to read no book to know that people go to war to make money. I was a grown man when they went to war to Vietnam or when they went to Iraq or wherever they went. What somebody got the question to speak about what was in this book? Where were you? I don't see no babies in the goddamn house. I see people part of my age. They ain't 12. So what's wrong with your own mind? If the president said that beware of the industrial military complex, I got a goddamn mind. Who is the president? Oh, that's President Eisenhower. But why did he say that? Oh, does he know what he's talking about? I decide what the fuck he was talking about and what is real. And I don't understand nobody that can't trust their own goddamn mind, or they got to run to a book, got to run to that. I was here when President Kennedy got killed in Dallas. I was here when the goddamn towers fell. I was looking on television like everybody else when the buildings fall down from a fire. Well, how am I going to sit up here and take the official version and say a fire was up on the floor when the building fell down? If I didn't know a goddamn thing about physics I'm old enough to have seen this building or that building, or in my case, I was at the Smithsonian and I saw the first high-rise they ever built because they had it in the Smithsonian right here in Chicago. I go to Shields Towers and you got a little auditorium there, and they said, well, you want to see how we, and you go in the auditorium, you got 15 minutes there, look at how they built the tower. Now, does that give me some right to determine whether this building is going to fall by fire? Give me a break, please. I got a mind. I can decide without from nobody else on earth that doesn't make sense to me. And what's wrong with that? Somebody mentioned building number 7. I was in the criminal justice system. That's my used to be job. Listen, people, circumstantial evidence is acceptable in court. Circumstantial evidence, not second-hand evidence, circumstantial evidence. If an asshole 3 buildings fall and he's gonna tell me, so those 2 buildings over there, 2 buildings over there, ain't saying shit about this one over here, there's circumstantial evidence that is something you don't want me to know. So fuck the official version. People, there's 2 things you can do. You can get you some books that counteract the ones that Andy got, and you can do you some thinking, and when you hear something, you can make your decision as, well, this true or false, or use your mind other than what he said to keep up with Loman or Kim Kardashian, and then when something happened right before you, the 5 senses you got would allow you to come to a conclusion that you're really able to stand up, and if anybody's telling you that not to, then you can wave them off.
I have never heard such a mixed up mishmash of truths, half-truths, and outright fabrications, except from Hitler. Now, the fascist method is to start with a kernel of truth and then say the same big lies over and over and over again, hoping that people will believe them. Well, this guy, he says that, for example, that Osama bin Laden was on the CIA payroll. Well, of course he was. He was involved in this successful U.S. CIA and Northern Alliance war against the Russian invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. But when that was over, and the United States put troops in Saudi Arabia, then Al-Qaeda became anti-American. Remember, so these were all Saudi Arabians. Al-Qaeda is Saudi Arabians. All the people on the planes with the box cutters were Saudi Arabians. And what happened was that these, first of all, that grill he had is made out of iron, not steel. Iron has different properties than steel. That doesn't prove anything. I worked at Square D Company that made the power system for the World Trade Centers. Al-Qaeda put a truck bomb in the basement and blew up all the electrical systems. We had to work 365 days a year for a year to make first a weatherproof set to go outside so they could turn the power off. Then they fixed the basement and we made a whole new set. We worked overtime every day, Saturday, Sunday, all around to fix the power systems. Al-Qaeda didn't get the building down, so they came back after they hit the Kenya U.S. Embassy in Kenya, after they hit the U.S. Hole, after these planes were full of fuel. They were going cross-country, and they were diverted to their targets. Now, it's true that the Bush administration used this attack to justify a totally unjustified war. I mean, Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. He was an Arab nationalist. And he came to power first as a CIA informer. he was told to machine gun the elected president of Iraq, and he did. And his uncle became vice president of Iraq, and then he became vice president of Iraq, and then he became president. But he was a friend of the U.S. until he went too far and went into Kuwait. So now I want to talk about environmentalism, because he made some truthful statements about environmentalism and some false ones. And I don't think I'll get all through this, but I'll give you part of it. At the demonstration in Washington, D.C. in February, to oppose the Keystone XL pipeline, which is being built to transport tar sand oil from Western Canada to the U.S. coast, Gulf Coast, thousands of eco-socialist contingents carried signs reading "System Change, not Climate Change." Now, 99% of the scientists believe in climate change. It's a reality. Also, 99% of the scientists and doctors believe that HIV is a virus that causes AIDS, and it does. If you fuck around out there without rubber, you're gonna get AIDS. And your brain will not save anybody from getting AIDS. They will get it if they fuck around. Now, the slogan was well received as growing numbers of environmental activists recognize that the only fundamental social and economic changes can solve the deepening global ecological crisis. He said that too, but he mixed it in with a lot of other stuff. What kind of changes are needed and what strategies can win them? There are serious debates within the movement. What I want to argue here is that activists have much to gain by engaging with the ecological critique of capitalism, first developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the 19th century. Until quite recently, there was a common myth that Marx and Engels had nothing useful to say about the environment. But over the last few years, this has changed. For example, in his 1844 economic and philosophic manuscripts, Marx wrote, "Man lives on nature, means that nature is his body, with which he must remain in conscious, continuous interchange if he is not to die. That man's physical and spiritual life is linked to nature means simply that nature is linked to itself, for man is part of nature." Marx and Engels point out in their later writings that capitalism disrupts the link between humans and the rest of the natural world to the detriment of both. Marx sometimes calls this the metabolic rift, and a quote, an irreparable break in the coherence of social interchange prescribed by the natural laws of life. Where am I on time?
You're about 6 minutes, about a minute over.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I guess this guy didn't buy in here.
I'm Michael Coley,
Taking the water.
and I'm on Andy's side. I'll nitpick a little bit with him over this or that or a detail here or there, but basically I agree with Andy. And I do think, I really don't think there's any reason for our government to feed us all these lies and BS. I think the ruling class could just do whatever it wants and laugh at us, and we just take it because that's how it works in this country and probably in the whole rest of the world. I'd say at least 90% of the people of this United States of America want to be oppressed. I ain't saying they just put up with it. I say they actually want to be oppressed because they keep voting for it. Every 2 years they go, and the vast majority of people who are sodomizing us get reelected. Now, we have been told for almost 12 years now that on September 11th, 2001, our country, our nation, the United States of America, was attacked by 19 guys with box cutters. That's what we've been told for almost 12 years now. That means that 19 guys with box cutters attacked every single one of us. They attacked the fetuses inside the bodies of pregnant women. They attacked old people in nursing homes with Alzheimer's. Our country was attacked on September 11th, 2001. That includes the United States military. I just thought I'd mention that to you. The United States Armed Forces was attacked by 19 guys with box cutters on September 11th, 2001. That's the official story of our government. Thank you for your medical diagnosis. Do I have to pay, or is that covered by Obamacare?
Political psychosis.
About a month ago, or 2 months ago, there was a head shrinker here, and I carefully explained that a head shrinker will tell you that all normal human behavior is proof that a person is an insane lunatic. I'm not offended or upset or swayed by people saying I'm insane. In fact, I have stood up here on several occasions and said, I know that I sound like I'm an insane lunatic, but everything I'm saying comes directly from our government. Now, Charlie, you asked, when did our government publish a list of high-level government officials who attacked us on 9/11, or some such question like that? Our government has been telling us for 11 and a half years that the highest level government official who was actively involved in the attack on September 11th was none other than Osama bin Laden, who was an employee of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Former.
And as far as him having a falling out with the United States government, I've said here before, he did not have any falling out with the United States government because he was not murdered by the United States government. Diem and his brother in South Vietnam were murdered by the United States government because they told President Kennedy they would not be slaves of the American empire. But Osama bin Laden was never murdered, he was never even harmed by our government. After he allegedly had a falling out with our government, which means he never had a falling out with our government told us Saddam Hussein was the head stud dude that ran the whole 9/11 operation, and he was an employee of the Central Intelligence Agency when he did it, an obedient, capable, competent employee of the United States government. Now, oppression, oppressors and people on domination trips. I've been saying for years that the oppressors oppress more and more, they expand their empires. Sooner or later, it's a long story, but sooner or later, all the lowlifes are oppressed. 80% of the people are oppressed, 90% of the people are oppressed, 95% of the people are oppressed. Pretty soon, for an oppressor to look around and want to find someone else to oppress, he's got to oppress one of his buddies. He's got to grab his buddy's turf. Eventually, they start eating each other. Now we have been told something this week. Our government knows every phone call that has been made by anybody from any telephone, and it knows who the phone call was made to. That means all these big shots, whether they're politicians or high-level government officials or high-level people in business, they know that there is a list of all their phone calls. When they're calling all their buddies cooking up deals, all that's recorded. All the phone calls to their whores are recorded. These guys know that if they got a grudge against somebody, they can find out his phone number and everybody he called, and it's, I'm going to start telling on you. And then that second guy's going to start telling on the first guy. And that includes the media. This guy Chuck Gowdy, he's always on TV, pointing the finger at some politician. Now we've been told all of Chuck Gowdy's phone calls are recorded by the government. Same thing. Pam Zeckman, Carol Marine, all the big shot reporters, all the big shot politicians, and their spouses and their kids. Every bit of dirt in everybody's closet that's been talked about on the telephone is all available. All you gotta do is file Freedom of Information Act. Anyway, I think it's gonna get interesting. The rich and powerful are gonna start stabbing each other in the back. You wanna talk about my proclivities, I'm gonna talk about yours, and it's all been recorded by our government. Okay, thanks.
Gene Horker.
Thanks, Andy. Very interesting. You always have a lot of material that's interesting to look at. Now, if memory serves me right, we once had somebody here who denied the Holocaust. It's been a long time ago, and I don't know if it's exact. It was German Rudolph. Yeah, sir. I think that's what his talk was about.
No.
Part of the issue here is trust. Who do you trust?
Me?
Well, when money is involved, my idea of trust goes downhill. I trust more people that I see face to face and can question and can check on things, and that's kind of a way to establish trust. And truth, well, truth is very elusive. I see Jeff coming up behind me, and maybe President Roosevelt should have known about Pearl Harbor. And maybe President Bush should have known about 9/11/01. There's some evidence in both cases that, hey, these guys should have known about these things. But whether they did or not, that is an excellent question. Another question that comes up is patriotism. Whenever you criticize our country, people seem to say, somehow you're unpatriotic. Well, I go with a Republican who said, my country, right or wrong, when right to be kept right, when wrong to be put right. It was Carl Schurz, as I have read. So that's my idea of patriotism. There's nothing more patriotic than questioning your country. And boy, do we have to question ours. Thank you.
Jeff Strummer. Thank you, Gene Horker.
All right, Andy. I certainly wouldn't go anywhere near where you're going with this unless you have a huge amount of scientific expertise. Yeah, it could be there's a whole bunch of scientists out there who say one side. And maybe even all of the scientists on the other side are one way or the other, but still, your chances of getting the American people to face what you're claiming is true, even if it all is true, are more or less ridiculously remote. What I suggest you do is give some thought to the sort of things that Charles Ferguson did with movies like Inside Job. There were key parts of that movie, if not most of the movie, which was not about a whole bunch of technical things that would get people's eyes, ears, etc. to glaze over in fairly due course. Ferguson and Inside Job, among other things, showed Carl Levin interrogating Goldman Sachs brass and reading from their emails, where they were boasting about how the stuff they were selling to the American people were, if I remember right among the phrases, pieces of shit. Now, when the American people hear the phrase piece of shit in that kind of a context, all right, they're gonna perk up. Gee, what's this? That movie went and showed Ben Bernanke get on national TV and say, oh, don't worry, housing prices never go down. And then you immediately, not long thereafter, if I remember right, they showed some sort of graph showing housing prices going down. Well, then again, that's a simple thing for the American people to understand, and all you need to do then after that is to say to the American people, yeah, and this guy still has his job? What does that say about the functioning of the system? What does the lack of prosecution of Goldman Sachs executives who called their own instruments pieces of shit say about the American system? There's plenty, as far as I'm concerned, about the American system to doubt in such a way as to call its integrity, among other things, into the gravest question, without getting yourself into the muck of scientific and quasi-scientific issues that are virtually guaranteed, if the American people try to follow the debate, it's virtually guaranteed the American people will tire of the debate. If you want to make a big shadoo about 9/11, rather than charging that the Bushies blew up the buildings and all, what I recommend you do is agitate for a pursuit of a handful of simple questions, non-scientific in nature, such as, well, let's see now, a building got knocked down, and then 40 minutes or so later, another building got knocked down. And yet, what was it, an hour or some such later, the Pentagon was naked as a jaybird. And we are told that some other hijacked airplane just got to fly right through Pentagon airspace as if they owned the damn airspace, and nobody did a thing. Well, gee, that's a question that the American people can understand. Viscerally, it's going to be, you don't have to know boo about science to imagine and presume that the American air defense system surely must be better than for it to be possible an hour or so after buildings got knocked down by hijacked airplanes to just let another hijacked airplane get anywhere near the Pentagon, much less actually be able to fly into it. But yet only rarely, if ever, do I hear any of the 9/11 conspiracy crowd refer to that kind of question. I think you're way better off, talking about the functioning in the first instance of the apparatuses of government in these contexts, insofar as you're going to talk about specifics at all. And it's as important and perhaps more important to ask not why did X happen and charge that this or that particular group of people did X in a certain particular way, such as blowing up the World Trade Centers with internal explosives, but rather ask, why didn't certain things happen that one would have expected to happen? The 9/11 thing is one example. The Kennedy thing is another. Jack Kennedy wasn't killed on the first shot, and he wasn't killed on the second shot. To my knowledge, he is the only head of state or head of government in all of human history to be killed not by the first shot, not by the second shot, but by the third shot. In other words, after the first two shots, the Secret Service personnel, including the driver or the chauffeur, everybody just sat there and did nothing. Or you could argue, nobody, amazingly, was in a position to do anything after two shots. If you go down those kind of roads, it seems to me you've got a much better chance of getting and holding the attention of the American people. And if you try to engage in some basic historical comparisons, such as, hey, you folks who insist Oswald did it with no aid whatsoever, and everybody in the whole system did everything just right, and nonetheless Oswald got it done, well, show me another example in all of human history where it was this easy for one lone gunman sniper to take out a president or head of state.
Archduke Ferdinand.
That was a conspiracy, not a single gunman. World of difference. Such that the Austrian government certainly believed it was a conspiracy and credibly charged to the world that the Serbian government was behind the conspiracy and managed to mobilize the Central Powers in a long world war over it. No, nobody, as far as I know, was claiming that one gunman or bomb man was responsible.
Yes. What about one anarchist?
No, it was a conspiracy. There were other bombs and what have you thrown in the motorcade. There was no question whether it was a conspiracy. The only question was whether the Serbian government was behind the conspiracy, or whether it was some bunch of loose cannons with the Serbian government being able to truthfully say, oh no, we didn't know anything of what they were doing. Nobody claimed it was a single person acting alone. Nobody. No, yeah, wait a minute now. I'm saying the first shot, not the first shot, not the second shot. I'm saying the third shot. In all these other cases, John Wilkes Booth, boom, one shot, one and out. And that's so with all of those other guys.
Okay.
Okay. Cheers.
All right. One lone gunman or three guys?
400 guys.
Says here, an evening of solutions. And that was why I came. I really could use a couple of solutions. I'm way short. I can see problems, and I don't just mean personal. I mean out there, local, city, state, global, solar system. I certainly see problems, and I really would like some solutions. And I didn't expect that I would be convinced of much tonight, but I was curious what was going to be offered. And instead of a list of solutions, I got a kind of a miscellaneous grab bag of conspiracy theories.
Suicide is the solution.
One fool at a time. One fool at a time.
I'm just trying to be helpful.
Richard Feynman, the Nobel-winning physicist who did everything from work on the Manhattan Project to pick every safe in Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project when he got bored, to giving advice on picking up Las Vegas showgirls, to being one of the definitive investigators of the first shuttle disaster. One of his many wonderful, wonderful quotations: the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Again, and this is one of the great scientists of the 20th century, a man of unimpeachable attainment. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. There was a little buzzword that's been going around the last couple of years. A couple of psychologists wondered how come, I mean, for example, 80% of drivers think they're above average, which obviously can't be the case. And these guys discovered, which when you look at it isn't that big a surprise, these guys discovered that the more inept someone is, the worse a judge they are of their own ineptness. And the fancy buzzword is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And there seems to be some kind of an idea that just because I've got a brain, that means I know how to operate it. Well, you know, I've got two legs, and they work pretty good. But neither me nor anybody else is going to confuse me with a football player or a ballet dancer. And rather than solutions, I really was up this evening against a variety of problems. And I think the biggest problem is credulity. Just believing an exaggerated inclination to believe. And I've got a bunch of little miscellaneous comments. The expression military-industrial complex originated in January 1960 when General Eisenhower gave his farewell address as president. General Smedley Butler of the Marine Corps spent the 1920s and 30s defending United Fruit Company against Central America. He died in 1940. I really, really doubt that Smedley Butler ever used the phrase military-industrial complex. That's typical of what we were hearing this evening.
a lot of reference was made to the owners of the media. Well, the media are owned by giant conglomerates who own all kinds of things. There are approximately 6 monster cartels that own practically all of the mass media in the country, regardless of which particular medium you're interested in. And I didn't bring the list with, but I know that one of the TV networks is owned by the same combine that owns General Electric, which makes nuclear power reactors. So you don't need a conspiracy. You don't need to give instructions to know which side your bread is buttered on. You don't need coordinated control for people to immediately cover their asses, and more broadly to act in their very obvious class interest. A friend of mine, I knew a guy quite a while, who was considered one of the great godfathers of conspiracy theory. And one time he was giving a talk, and at the end, when it was question time, somebody asked, "Do you believe in UFOs?" And Bob said, "Of course, sure." And this guy immediately goes into a pitch about flying saucers. And Bob said, "Well, there's the difference. You and I both believe in UFOs. You believe you know what they are. I believe that I don't." And I'm getting the time sign. Smirking Chimp is good, Truth Out is good, Rocky Mountain Institute is good. It's a pity that a couple of really good sources got mixed up with all this tripe.
Good evening. Andy presented a number of things, and most of them, a lot of them, seem to be rather hard to swallow. But the fact is that everyone thought Winston Churchill was nuts when he said that Hitler was going to do all the terrible things that he did, because nobody thought he was going to be so aggressive. But that's one reason why Churchill is considered to be such a great man, because he saw that ahead of time. And so when a guy like Andy starts sounding the clarion, I think what's important is to look at the sources that he points out, the books. Unfortunately, all of us are tied up with our 9-to-5 jobs and our nucleuses, and so we don't have a lot of time to do that, but we ought to at least pick up 1 or 2 of the books and read them as we have the time, so that we can make a more accurate judgment. And I do want to point out that as far as the government spying on us and listening to us on the phones, I think most of us know that the government has been spying on us for years and years and years. That's not what's so terrible. What is really so terrible is that we are now at a point where the President of the United States is saying he's defending spying on the people and saying that we should strike a balance. We have to give up some of our security, some of our freedom, in order to have security. That is a proposition that every tyrant in the world has made. Hitler, Stalin, the lot of them. Give us your security. Give us your freedom, and we will give you security. That is an offer that cannot be backed up. They cannot give you security, because there is no security in life. There's only security in death. So having a president at this point who is telling us that we have to have some spying to protect the American people, that is despicable. The other thing I want to say is that also with the IRS having been caught giving left-wing organizations a pass and coming down real hard on right-wing organizations, and so that it's obvious that they've been put up to doing this. I believe that eventually this will lead directly to the president himself. This may in fact be Obama's Watergate. He may wind up having to resign over it. But all I'm saying is that things are happening now, and so the people must know that government lies to us, and so that we have to scrutinize everything. Thank you.
Dave, if an organization doesn't want to pay taxes, aren't you think they're kind of like obligated to answer some questions, or we just automatically say, oh, that's okay, you don't have to pay taxes, no problem? No, that's not going to happen. It's unrealistic. Okay, I will be eclectic as usual. Let's begin by thanking Andy again. He brought a bunch of literature. Gave us quite a bit to talk about here. I'm going to be eclectic as usual here. When I started with the college complexes, there's still some old timers who are talking about how Roosevelt was involved in Pearl Harbor. Later on, they got Cardinal Spellman caused the war in Vietnam. Cardinal Spellman of the Roman Catholic Church brought about the war in Vietnam. I mean, I kind of like conspiracies and these dark theories. When the internet first turned on, the first thing I looked up, as a matter of fact, were conspiracies. And the conspiracy theories in which I learned that Elvis was in fact not dead, but living in a town in Mississippi. And he had paid everyone in this town, he'd get an annuity to keep quiet about this, so if you go there and you, let's say, nonchalantly say, you know, hey, does Elvis live here? Everyone will deny it. But regarding information, there's a law among librarians that probably only about 5 to 10% of the information in the world is real solid. And the rest of it begins to drift off. And I give you an example here. I got this magazine from Diana, and it has an article here about the world coming to an end. And it says, is this our final century? Now, this is a magazine of astronomy, but I imagine the point is there's probably, Joe would tell me, isn't there a journal of American astronomy or something like that? Even among journal articles, you find the real significant information in only about 5% of the journals, at least in academia. And the rest of these, you know, that's the other thing about books. There's 50,000, maybe 55,000 books published in a year. There's an awful lot of media out there. There's a lot of TV stations, talk radio, and what have you. But even among libraries, there's a process in which there's like standard books for public libraries in which they're reviewed very assiduously into accurate information. So anytime you veer away from that, you know, it's just like certain newspapers are called flagship newspapers, like the New York Times National Edition, Washington Post, maybe one or two others. Those are going to be solid. The rest of them, you better realize what you're reading here. And there's no official mechanism for this. That's what I was asking. But nevertheless, the criteria and the standards for articles and things of this nature. If the articles in, like your book, underreported or other things, there very well may in fact be a reason if you look at each of the things. Why didn't it make the flagship newspapers and things of that nature? I don't know. You'd have to look further. But that's the way information works. The other thing is
publishers. Now you have certain publishing houses. As a matter of fact, I remember the librarian downtown in the poli-sci department, was a good friend of mine, was very well versed on this and what publishers were reputable. And a reputable publisher is not going to go near gibberish or nonsense. If it's some random house or something like this, I can assure you that's going to be a good book. Especially some of the things like historical books and things of that nature. So I mean, the publisher, now that's not always the case. I was just reading, I'm going to lecture on the American Revolution. Thomas Paine couldn't find a publisher for his Common Sense. He actually went through 9 publishers, they wouldn't go near it. And certainly this was a merit of a publication with some merit. Let's see, getting into conspiracies in general now, here's the thing. If I'm accused of a crime, let's say, Charles, did you shoot your girlfriend? And I say, no, I didn't, some other guy did it. Guess what happens? Whether we like it or not, the burden of proof shifts. You're a lawyer. The burden of proof shifts. Okay, Charles, if you didn't shoot her, who did, sir? And I say, well, it was some guy. Could you describe? Well, yeah, that's what you're kind of faced with. Whether we like it or not, that burden of proof shifts. And that's, anyone in the legal profession knows that. It's where you're at here. But anyhow, you gave us a lot to talk about here. I actually, regarding it, the one thing I must confess, one of my favorite pastimes is watching these ancient alien guys, though, and seeing how they operate and come up with theories of how, and explanations. And what happened and things of that. They're on Friday nights now, and I never miss those guys. I love them. I don't know where they found them. But they're, by the way, we had the Heineck Center here. I don't even know if it's still operating. But those are guys that give explanations, and I love it because they're just so damn creative. It's just great. It's worth every minute of TV. That's one thing on TV that I always want. Anyhow, thanks a lot. I enjoyed it. Come again. And sorry for the less than perfect conditions, but I think we had a good evening anyway. And see you tomorrow at the book fair.
For years now, Andy has been telling us that HIV is a fraud. A lot of people have died of this fraud, and I would strongly urge those who get an HIV positive reading it would be good to get a second opinion, another test, but there are false positives, but I think that HIV is real. A lot of people have died from the same set of symptoms, and they were getting those deaths in multiple numbers before the AZT cure was recommended. The question was how people got it, and they did find people having a common cause. That is, that they were having sex together.
Or needles.
Or needles, right. Or blood transfusions, or whatever.
I should catch them off.
I don't think HIV AIDS is simply a phantom of the drug industry's imagination. conspiracy. It may be exaggerated. It may be that our drug industry is very, all they have to do is to notify the lawyers that they can threaten to sue, and news media will shut up about them and their medications, that doesn't mean that everything is healthy when doctors say that it's a threat. The problem with finding conspiracies everywhere is that there are conspiracies everywhere, but they're usually, that doesn't mean that every imagination of a conspiracy is for real. And it's somewhat deleterious to have to confuse people with imaginary conspiracies when there are enough conspiracies that are real, and you should be able to detect those. And it's difficult, as Andy pointed out, sometimes to tell the difference between a real conspiracy and one that is somebody else's imagination. I don't think that 9/11 was, I think that it was the product of conspiracy, but I doubt that all of it was the conspiracy of W. Bush and company. I think that Al-Qaeda and company have a good share to blame on it. And the United States has thrown its power around in the world enough to offend a great many people in the world, among them people in the Middle East.
Speaker gets the last word.
That's full.
I'll try to be really brief here. From what I heard on the comments, some of you understood what I was talking about, and some of you didn't. Some of you are exactly where Professor David Ray Griffin was before he looked at the evidence on 9/11. After he started looking at it, he ended up writing 10 books, which are world famous for summarizing the evidence. Before I go any further, are all of you still awake? Can I have a show of hands here? I'm going to hold up 4 books. A show of hands, who's read these things? Here's this one called AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire that I cited as a history of our corporate drug running. How many people have read this book here? Anybody? No. What about the censored 2011 edition? Okay, did the people that read the censored 2011, did you see the whole section running from about 2007 on the forensic evidence of 9/11? And do you just dismiss that out of hand as having no credibility?
I agree with the experts.
Have you read Capital?
Okay, the question I have is, somebody says he agrees with the experts, but he doesn't agree that my assessment of what happened in New York is correct. Is that true? You think it was done by Al-Qaeda, but you claim to have read this book. Okay. The other one, third one, who's read Official Stories by Liam Sheff? Gary over here? Anybody else? Okay. And this last one. this physics textbook put out by Professor Judy Wood, from retired professor from Clemson. It has a degree, several degrees in materials science and engineering. Has anybody read this one yet? It was published in 2010. I didn't find out about it until 3 months ago because of the coordinated blackout, even on the 9/11 sites.
How about wage, labor, and capital?
Okay, I sympathize with those of you that can't bring yourselves to look at the reality of what's being published globally and has been solid for the last 15 or 20 years on certain subjects. This is not one person's opinion. I'm just simply giving you a translation of a very large database on each of these subjects that I talk to. And all I can suggest to you is, like, who was it? Gene said, pick up a book and read it. Read something else. Start reading some of these things of people that are devoting their lives to try and help humanity move forward. There's a lot of people risking their lives and their careers and their livelihood on several different subjects to speak out and try to save lives and move forward. And it's common knowledge among doctors around the world, in many places, that they agree with Professor, I guess Dr. Luc Montagnier from France has been saying for 20 years, HIV is not the cause of what's making people sick. Other things are. There's AIDS. A lot of people died of AIDS, a lot of people have AIDS, but it's not caused by the harmless HIV virus, it's caused by other things, and if you get proper treatment, most of the illnesses are treatable and curable. The reason so many people died in this country is they were taking a fatal chemotherapy drug that one doctor said, more than one doctor has said, that AZT was known by the doctors to be the equivalent of taking rat poison 4 times a day. There was no debate on that. The cheerleading doctors were paid to cheerlead those patients right into their graves. But that wasn't covered by the American news. It was written about in some of these books going back 20 years, but some of these books are hard to find through Barnes & Noble and Borders because they will say it's a print on demand or it's a low run or something else. The censored news series, though, is available. Barnes & Noble usually stocks it, and you can order it online, get copies quick. I totally sympathize with the people that say, this is a huge mismatch of hogwash. Well, 15 years ago I said that on some things, and then I've read 75 books on the subject in the last 15 years. My brother and I digest a book a week, so we add 50 books a year to our library. So I live in a library of 3,000 books. When I talk about summarizing a database, it's not 1 or 2 or 5 books on a subject. Generally it's dozens. We've got hundreds of books talking about the military, global environmental issues, the military. And incidentally, General Smedley Butler didn't mention the military-industrial complex. That he talked about the concept. He just didn't use that term. But if you read his work, he said exactly the same thing that General Eisenhower said, that it's corporations driving the military for profit. And all I can say to each of you, we have plenty of literature up here tonight with references listed, and in the case, I have to make a comment. I'm familiar with all of the websites that are listed on this page, and with possibly 2 exceptions that I don't go to that often, one called Who, What, and Why, and another one called What Really Happened. All of those others, all of them, have highly, highly credible articles day by day by day. And to laugh, sir, shows your ignorance on the subject. It's offensive ignorance for somebody that has an education like yourself to stand up here and say that this list of highly credible people risking their lives to make things better is a bunch of hogwash.
No, most of it's hogwash, not all.
No, well, that's my point. When you say most, you're lumping in a lot of good people that have published a lot of highly credible sources that you haven't read. And that's the problem we have in America. People that haven't read and looked at the evidence will stand up at a podium and say, oh, that's a crock of hogwash, we don't have to look at it. That's why Americans are living in a Disneyland of militant ignorance, because up until now, we have not confronted this kind of ignorance and unawareness in college-educated, very smart people with huge educations are unaware of the database that exists on certain subjects. A lady that left earlier has 8 kids, and she said that some of the stuff she heard here tonight was the first, and she's going to talk to her kids. A lot of people aren't aware that the pharmaceutical industry in this country is giving away 200,000 free bogus HIV tests a year to stamp medical records positive as a pre-existing condition. The insurance companies are doing that. HIV stamped on your records is a great pre-existing condition that will prevent you from getting affordable health care from all kinds of different companies. And if there's a doctor in the house that can refute that, let me know. But as far as all the doctors and other nurses I've talked to, everybody agrees that if you're considered HIV positive, you're a risk. And so they're doing 2 things. The insurance companies are getting rid of a whole bunch of people that they don't have to provide affordable health care to, and they're developing a market for the so-called new cocktail of AIDS drugs to make profits off these people. And one author wrote, it's like going to a voodoo doctor. First you get the curse, then you start donating money to the pharmaceutical industry. The curse of the donations. We could spend the whole evening talking about that, and it's not just AIDS, that the pharmaceutical industry is making enormous profits off people in this country. So, as Americans, like the new book, some of these books are so new, I have not digested them fully over the last 2 or 3 years. I've read them through the first time. No, Days of Destruction, Critch Hedges. Basically, you're saying that the American middle class, we didn't talk about this, but the middle class is under attack in America. Middle class has been solidly under attack since Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980. It really picked up speed then. And right now, in terms of economics, economic theory, governing theory, the idea that free markets will organize a society the best, we're living in the largest failure of a governing ideology in the history of the world. And as he said, the only option we have left is to protest. Rise up and make our voices known before the middle class is totally gone, before the American dream for young people is completely dead. Other countries are showing us the way. The solutions are all over the place if you just open your mind and look at them and study. So feel free to call me for any references. Any one of you that I would highly suggest, crack a book, any one on that list. Just order out of those 14 books, pick any one. Pick any one at all and read it, digest it, and then call me back and see if you still have the same opinion that it's a bunch of hogwash. Each one of these buildings, each one of these 14 books is a summary with a bunch of references, credible sources of all kinds of things. It's not the opinion of one scientist, okay? So let's, everybody, maybe you can make a New Year's resolution starting now or read one blacked out book in the year and see what happens. Thank you very much.
Yeah, something.